White woman calls security on black girl. Regrets it when she pulls out a CIA badge. A crisp wind drifted through the wide corridors of mall, carrying the scent of cinnamon pretzels and fresh cotton from the clothing stores that lined its two expansive floors. People bustled about, some clutching shopping bags, others sipping on cold drinks as they walked. It was early afternoon on a weekday, a time when the mall was generally quieter than on weekends but still active enough to feel vibrant. Amid the scattering of families and retirees, a young black woman strode with purposeful confidence toward a tucked between a jewelry store and an electronics retailer. Her name was, and she had a particular reason for visiting this mall, a reason no one here could have guessed. Was in her late 20s with a tall, athletic build. Her mother always said she walked like she was on a mission, head high, shoulders back. Her deep brown skin, flawless except for a small scar beneath her right eye, seemed to catch the overhead lights in soft reflections. She wore simple attire, jeans, a cream-colored turtleneck under a light jacket, and comfortable flats. At a glance, she looked like any other shopper checking out the local bargains. What most people couldn't see was that this was no ordinary young woman. Worked for the Central Intelligence Agency in a covert operations role, embedded domestically for an ongoing assignment. She wasn't here for a typical spy mission that day, though. She'd come to pick up a specialized book order from a rare print store, an order that contained coded documents crucial to a case she was building. As she rounded a corner near the entrance of the bookstore, let her gaze sweep discreetly across the mall's walkways. She had a habit of scanning her surroundings, checking for anything unusual, a skill she had honed during her many training sessions at the farm in Virginia. Everything seemed normal at first. A mother calming a fussy toddler, two teenage girls flipping through their phones, an older man perched on a bench enjoying an ice cream cone. Yet as eyes flicked from one face to another, she sensed a subtle shift in the air, a tension that pricked the back of her neck. She traced the feeling to its source, a woman standing near the row of potted plants by the bookstore's entrance. She was white, probably in her early 40s, her hair carefully styled in a high ponytail. She wore a fashionable blazer over a pastel blouse, paired with pressed slacks. The woman's expression was pinched, as though she had just inhaled something unpleasant. Her eyes were locked on, had encountered that look often enough to recognize it. Suspicion mixed with a dash of hostility, as though she had committed an offense simply by existing in the same space. The woman's name, though didn't know it yet, was Spencer. Exuded the aura of a self-appointed gatekeeper, someone who needed everything and everyone around her to conform to her personal expectations. She stood with her arms crossed, lips pursed, radiating disapproval at its presence. Raised an eyebrow slightly, choosing to ignore it for the moment. She'd experienced racial profiling before. Often the best response was to proceed calmly, focusing on her own task. Entered the bookstore. A faint scent of old paper and leather bindings welcomed her. The shop was small but cozy, with tall shelves that formed a narrow labyrinth. A tiny bell on the door jingled overhead, alerting the clerk behind the counter. The clerk, a middle-aged man with silver hair, offered a friendly smile. "Hello, how can I help you today?" "I have a special order under the name J. Rhodes," replied, using her cover alias Rhodes Not. Part of her job required living under multiple identities to avoid detection, even on something as seemingly mundane as picking up a book. The clerk nodded. "Ah, yes, one moment." He disappeared behind a curtain dividing the main store from a back room. Patiently waited, skimming the featured novels on a nearby table. Outside, through the window, she glimpsed drifting closer, peering in as though trying to track movements. Felt a twinge of annoyance, but she kept her expression neutral. She reminded herself to stay composed. She didn't want any confrontation over something trivial. A few moments later, the clerk returned with a small cardboard package. He asked for her ID, which she provided, a driver's license matching her Rhodes alias. Satisfied, he handed over the package and thanked her for her business. Clutching the package, thanked him in return and exited the shop. She planned to leave the mall promptly. She wanted to get the documents in this disguised book to her safe house, where she'd decode them at length. But as soon as she stepped back into the corridor, Spencer seemed to materialize in her path. Placed herself squarely in front of, arms stiff, chin lifted in a posture of challenge. "Excuse me," she said, her tone chilled with politeness so thin it could hardly be called polite. "I'm curious about what you were doing there. You don't look like the usual type who shops at that bookstore." Inhaled slowly, keeping her face as impassive as possible. I'm sorry, do I know you? She responded calmly. She'd learned not to escalate. Some people were simply spoiling for a fight, gave a tight smile. No, you don't. But I've worked in this mall for years, and I've never seen you before. That store carries rare and expensive books. Not that I'm suggesting anything, but it's not cheap. Are you sure you belong there? Blinked. The insinuation was crystal clear. She forced her voice to remain measured. I'm a paying customer, and I picked up an order, nothing more. If you'll excuse me, I need to head out. She stepped around, intending to walk away. But's hand shot out to Grab's forearm. Her grip wasn't strong enough to physically restrain, but the gesture was jarring, an unwelcome violation of personal space. His immediate training kicked in. She had to quell the instinct to break free with a self-defense maneuver. Instead, she calmly pulled her arm back. I'm sorry, but don't touch me, said, her voice cool with a trace of steel. That's not okay. A few slowed to watch. Sensing eyes on her, cheeks reddened, but she doubled down, pointing a finger toward the store. I want to know what you were doing in that shop. I saw you acting suspicious. Why don't you let mall security check your bag, unless you have something to hide? His heart pounded with mingled anger and exasperation. This was the last thing she needed. She had no intention of opening the package in public, given its covert nature. But she also didn't want a full-blown scene. Taking a deep breath, she responded in a low tone, I was picking up a purchase, that's all. Now please let me be on my way. Planted her hands on her hips, raising her voice as if delivering a public service announcement. I'm calling security. This is highly irregular. You can stand here and wait until they arrive, or we can do this the hard way. The remark was so absurd that almost laughed, but the severity of the situation prevented any amusement. Was essentially accusing her of theft or wrongdoing based on nothing more than racial bias and paranoia. Looked around. A small crowd had begun to gather, their faces reflecting confusion, curiosity, or discomfort. Mall employees peeked out from nearby stores, drawn by the commotion. Weighed her options. She could flash her CIA credentials immediately and shut this down, but that would blow her cover. Her standard training hammered home the principle that a covert agent should never reveal official status unless it was absolutely necessary. But if security came, and its accusations escalated, could end up in a confrontation that risked her assignment. She decided to try a final time to escalate. She took one step closer to, keeping a respectful distance but letting her voice carry. Ma'am, said, I have done nothing wrong. If you insist on calling security, that's your choice, but please understand this is harassment. I'm not obliged to let you or anyone else search my personal belongings without cause. Jaw said. She pulled out her phone, tapping the mall's security line from memory. Yes, hello? I need a security officer by the Rare Tome bookstore. Near entrance C, there's a suspicious individual here refusing to cooperate. The crowd murmured, felt heat flush her cheeks. She clenched her jaw, biting back a retort that threatened to slip out. She kept telling herself, stay calm, you've trained for situations far more dangerous than this. A couple of onlookers seemed sympathetic, with one older woman shaking her head in disapproval at. But no one intervened. Set her stance, one foot slightly behind the other, preparing mentally for the next steps. Within minutes, 2 security officers arrived. They wore standard mall uniforms, black slacks, polo shirts with embroidered security patches, and heavy belts with radios and flashlights. One was a tall black man in his late 30s, the other a younger white man who appeared nervous, a little uncertain. Wasted no time stepping forward. Officers, I saw this woman, she pointed dramatically at. She went into the bookstore and came out acting suspicious, and when I asked to see what she had, she refused. She's being uncooperative, and I believe she might have stolen something or is loitering. I don't know, but she's definitely up to no good. The older security officer, whose name tag read T. Lewis, glanced at, noticing how calmly she stood. He looked back to, eyebrows lifting. Ma'am, are you an employee here at the mall or a manager? Squared her shoulders. I'm a consultant for one of the retailers, she said, which was technically true. She worked for a boutique brand that had a store on the 2nd floor. But I've been here for years. I know suspicious behavior when I see it. Officer Lewis gave a slight nod, then addressed with a more neutral tone. Miss, do you mind telling us your side of the story? We got a call about a disturbance. Took a breath. Certainly, officer. I came to pick up an order from the bookstore. The gentleman at the counter confirmed my purchase and gave me my package. This woman, She gestured calmly toward, confronted me, demanded to see my bag, and accused me of not belonging. I told her no, I haven't done anything wrong. Officer Lewis rubbed his chin. All right. Do you have a receipt for the item you picked up? Nodded, grateful she'd slipped the receipt into her jacket pocket. She pulled it out carefully and offered it. Officer Lewis reviewed it, verifying the title and date, then handed it back to her. The younger officer, shifting anxiously from foot to foot, glanced at. "It seems like she has proof of purchase, ma'am," he said, his voice tentative. "She's free to shop here like anyone else." His face reddened, but she persisted. "I still think she's suspicious. Look at her. She's acting all defensive, refusing to let me see what's in her package." Officer Lewis sighed quietly. He turned to once more. "Miss, is there anything you can do to ease her concerns? If everything is above board, maybe just showing us the item might help diffuse this. We don't want to escalate something unnecessarily." Understood the officer's attempt to keep the peace. But she also knew that opening the package in public risked revealing the coded contents, or at least raising questions about why she had an obscure text. She weighed the potential cost to her operation. The coded documents hidden in the book were crucial to her ongoing investigation into a foreign intelligence network. She couldn't let them be compromised, especially not because a random shopper decided to play vigilante. She swallowed her frustration and replied, "I understand your position, officer, but this is a personal purchase containing personal information. I've shown you my receipt. I'm not required to open it in front of an audience just to satisfy someone's baseless suspicions." She glanced meaningfully at whose nostrils flared in indignation, jabbed a manicured finger in its direction. "See, she's hiding something. Why else would she refuse?" Officer Lewis raised a placating hand. "Ma'am, she's within her right to not open her possessions, especially since she's provided proof of purchase." He turned back to lowering his voice. "However, miss, for the sake of argument, are you able to show me privately away from the crowd? If that's not possible, I'll let you be on your way." Lick paused, feeling the weight of the choice. She was about to politely decline when shrill voice sliced through the air again. "This is ridiculous. You're letting her walk off with who knows what. She could be a thief or worse." His patience snapped. She turned fully to, meeting her gaze head-on. "What exactly are you implying? You've been harassing me since I stepped out of that store. You grabbed my arm, you called security, and you're still not satisfied." Her eyes blazed. "This is nothing but harassment. If you don't back down, I'll have to take further steps." Sneered, "Oh, what are you going to do? Complain that you were profiled? Good luck with that." A hush settled over the crowd. Officer Lewis frowned, clearly uncomfortable with his tone. Felt her entire body tense. She'd encountered racists before, but the brazenness of hostility was hitting a nerve. She didn't want to reveal her true identity, but continuing to spar here risked blowing up even more. With her operational cover at stake, perhaps it was time for a measured but pointed reveal, just enough to shut this woman down. She silently reminded herself to keep calm, to do this in a controlled manner. She reached inside her jacket, carefully pulling out a small black wallet. "Officer," she said quietly, her tone shifting to a no-nonsense professional register, "I'm going to show you something. Then we can end this conversation." Lick's eyes narrowed in suspicion. Officer Lewis leaned slightly forward, prepared for the possibility that might produce an ID or some other credentials. He had no idea what he was about to see. Flipped open the wallet, revealing a metallic badge and laminated identification card. The circular emblem, etched with an eagle and shield, was unmistakable to anyone familiar with official government insignia. Bold letters read, "Central Intelligence Agency." A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Several heads craned to see the badge. His face went stark white, her bravado suddenly evaporating into disbelief. She took a half step back. Officer Lewis's eyes widened. The younger officer's mouth dropped open. His voice was firm but calm. "I'm a federal agent. The package I'm carrying is part of my official assignment, and its contents are classified. Now I hope you understand why I can't open it here." She turned her gaze toward whose jaw seemed to have locked. "So let's be perfectly clear. I've done absolutely nothing wrong, and this entire episode is a product of your paranoia, prejudice, and baseless assumptions." For a moment, no one spoke. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. His lips moved, but no words emerged. Officer Lewis took a breath, shifting to a more formal posture. "I see. Agent," he glanced at the ID again, reading the alias. "Agent Rhodes, I apologize for any inconvenience. If you'd like, we can escort you to your vehicle or— I can get there just fine on my own, officer, said, a steely note in her voice. I appreciate your professionalism, though. The older guard nodded. Of course, you're free to proceed. Is there anything you'd like us to do about? He paused, glancing at Study's face. The woman looked as if she were caught between terror and humiliation. I'd like a formal written report about how she harassed me, physically grabbed me, and falsely accused me of wrongdoing. If your mall has any policy about discrimination, I suggest you follow it. Finally found her voice a weak stammer. I didn't mean, I just thought. She stopped, eyes brimming with shame or anger or both. The crowd watched, some with guarded satisfaction, others with pity. Took a slow breath, forcing down the swirl of adrenaline that left her hands trembling. She'd lived through far more dangerous confrontations in her fieldwork, but none of those threatened her sense of personal dignity like this had. Think twice before you judge someone you know nothing about, she said quietly, her gaze piercings. Next time it might not end so simply. Without waiting for a response, turned on her heel, the small cardboard package still clutched in her left hand, her CIA credentials in her right. The crowd parted for her as she strode away, each step measured, refusing to let her posture betray the roil of emotions inside. She could hear a sputter of voices behind her, frantic justifications, the security officers telling her to calm down and step aside. Kept walking until the murmurs dissolved into the background noise of the mall. By the time she reached the exit, her heart was pounding so loudly she could feel it in her ears. She forced a steady exhale, recalling her training. Assess, calm, proceed. She was okay. She had diffused the situation, yet the sting of it lingered, lodged in her chest like a shard of ice. She had hoped that wearing normal clothes, moving discreetly, she could slip in and out of the mall unnoticed. Instead, she'd been singled out by a perfect stranger who decided she didn't belong. Stepping into the sunshine of the parking lot, spotted her SUV parked near the far end. She took a circuitous route, scanning her surroundings to ensure no one followed or observed her. Then, satisfied, she clicked the remote to unlock the doors, slid into the driver's seat, and set the package gently on the passenger side. For a moment, she just gripped the steering wheel, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. Deep breaths, she whispered to herself, pulling in the crisp autumn air through her nose and releasing it through her mouth. She repeated the mantra until her racing thoughts began to calm. She was still incensed, yes, but she reminded herself. Part of her identity as an agent was dealing with hostility in many forms, some from foreign enemies, some from unexpected sources at home. She'd just not expected it today, in a mundane setting like a mall, from someone who had no idea who she was. His phone buzzed on the center console. She glanced at the screen. A secure message from her CIA contact, indicating the immediate need for an update on the documents. She typed a quick response confirming she had retrieved them and was heading to the safe house. Then, starting the SUV, she reversed out of her parking space and left the mall behind. That evening, sat in her small rented townhouse, a temporary arrangement provided by the agency for her current op, poring over the coded documents. The book from the store was actually a hollowed-out collection of historical essays, concealing digital storage and thinly folded papers containing cryptic references to assets, times, and places. Meticulously cross-referenced them with her intelligence data, a map spread on the coffee table. She was searching for patterns, for the missing pieces that would illuminate the next phase of her investigation. Usually she found solace in the methodical nature of analysis. But tonight, her mind kept drifting back too. Hands fisted around the edges of the documents as she remembered the condescending tone, the accusing finger. It was such a personal violation, like being singled out in a crowd simply for the color of her skin. She forced herself to refocus. The job came first. She was on the verge of identifying a rogue group that had been funneling sensitive information to a foreign adversary. Any misstep could cost the agency months of work, even lives. Exhaled, carefully piecing together clues late into the night. Around midnight, she finally pinpointed a possible drop site in northern Virginia. She sent an encrypted message to her superiors, then collapsed onto the couch, eyes shut in exhaustion. Yet sleep wouldn't come easily. Flashes of the day's events returned unbidden. Her initial sense of humiliation and anger gave way to determination. She resolved that if faced any consequences through a small investigation, it would stand as a reminder that calling security on an innocent person for no reason was unacceptable. His final thought before she drifted off was a silent vow never to shrink in the face of such bias, She had the voice, the position to stand up against it. And she would. Days passed, and routine returned to a semblance of normal. She checked in at her covert office in D.C., collaborated with her team, and prepared for the next steps in the sting operation she was orchestrating. In the background of her mind, she occasionally wondered about the fallout at the mall. Part of her was tempted to follow up with the head of mall security to ensure behavior was addressed, but her official duties took priority. She had no time to chase personal grievances. Then one afternoon, while finishing a briefing at Langley, she received a surprising phone call. It was from T. Lewis, the older mall security officer who had responded to S's call. Had left him her card after she revealed her credentials, instructing him to forward any incident reports. She took the call in a quiet hallway, keeping her voice low. "Agent Rhodes?" came Lewis's voice. "It's Officer Lewis from Mall. I hope it's okay I'm calling." Leaned against a wall, her adrenaline spiking slightly. "Of course, Officer Lewis. Please call me. That's simpler. What's the update?" Lewis cleared his throat. "Well, the short version is that we concluded our investigation into the incident that day. We interviewed witnesses, reviewed footage, got statements. The mall's management decided that Ms. Spencer violated the mall's policies on harassment and discrimination. They've barred her from mall premises until further notice." Felt a wave of relief, but also a certain heaviness, knowing it was never pleasant to see someone's livelihood threatened. "I see. Well, I appreciate you taking it seriously. If someone repeatedly harasses others, there need to be consequences." Lewis hesitated. "Yes, ma'am, we agree. I wanted to let you know because, well, Ms. Spencer has apparently been raising a fuss about wanting to speak with you directly. She's claiming she needs to apologize or make amends. She's been contacting the mall offices, asking for your information." His eyebrows lifted, and, "Did you give her anything?" "Of course not," Lewis replied firmly. "We respect your privacy, but she's persistent. She's actually threatened to sue the mall for defamation, can you believe it? She's also saying she'll do whatever it takes to clear her name. So I just wanted to give you a heads up." Sighed, "Thanks for letting me know. I'm not particularly interested in speaking with her, to be honest. If she wants to apologize, she can do it through official channels. But I appreciate you looking out for me." Lewis's tone was sympathetic. "I understand. If she keeps pushing, we'll let her know any further harassment might be met with legal action. We have the footage of the entire incident, so it's not exactly in her favor." Nodded even though Lewis couldn't see her. "All right, thanks for the update. If anything changes or if you need a statement from me, please reach out. Otherwise, I'll let it be." They said their goodbyes and pocketed her phone, feeling a complex swirl of emotions. She had never intended for it to be banned from her workplace, but the woman's actions had been out of line. Perhaps this was the only way for the mall to ensure others weren't similarly harassed. For a fleeting moment, felt a pang of pity for losing her consultant role at the mall must be a blow, but it was so undoing. Squared her shoulders, reminding herself that she had no time for distractions. She had a mission to complete. By the following week, was deeply enmeshed in CIA business. She'd identified a critical lead, a suspect named Malcolm Burns, who seemed to be at the heart of a network funneling American tech secrets overseas. The data retrieved from the bookstore-coded documents led her to a series of drop locations. She compiled the evidence into a dossier. Now, with her team, she prepared for a field operation to apprehend Burns during a clandestine meeting at an abandoned warehouse in southeast D.C. On the night of the operation, stood in front of a dusty mirror in the safe house, adjusting her bulletproof vest beneath a loose jacket. She clipped her badge onto an interior pocket, ensuring easy access in case local law enforcement needed to confirm her identity. Her service weapon rested in a holster at her hip, another precaution. She braided her hair close to her scalp, a practical style that wouldn't get in the way. A sense of calm resolve settled over her. She was trained for this. She had the experience, the skill, and the unwavering commitment to see justice done. Outside, a black SUV with tinted windows waited to transport her to the staging area. Her colleague, Agent Santiago, would be her backup. The plan was to observe the meet from a concealed vantage point, gather photographic evidence, and move in once Burns made contact with his foreign handlers. Yet as she grabbed her keys and phone, she noticed multiple missed calls from an unknown number. She frowned but ignored them. Personal calls had no place on a night like this. She'd check later. She slid into the SUV, nodded at Agent Santiago behind the wheel, and they drove into the night. The operation began smoothly. and Santiago set up their vantage point on the roof of a derelict building adjacent to the warehouse. Through night vision binoculars, they tracked Malcolm Burns stepping out of a silver sedan, pacing in the shadows, talking into his phone. Another car arrived, presumably the foreign contact. Two individuals in dark suits emerged. Snapped photos with a high-powered camera capturing each face. The tension was palpable. Years of investigative work boiling down to this confrontation. The plan was to let them exchange evidence, so they'd have the proof needed to lock Burns up for espionage, then move in. His earpiece crackled with Santiago's calm voice. Target is approaching the contact. Stand by, checking for weapons. Inched forward, taking more shots, adrenaline humming in her veins. The suspicious figures began a hushed conversation. Burns handed over what looked like a flash drive. Snapped more photos, feeling triumphant. This was the proof they needed. Suddenly, one of the foreign agents looked up, scanning the rooftops. Froze. She realized the man might have spotted a faint reflection from her lens. He barked something at Burns. The entire group scattered, splitting in different directions, cursed under her breath. She relayed quickly into her radio, "They're spooked. Move in now." She and Santiago dashed for the building's metal stairs, their footsteps echoing. They'd planned for a stealthy approach, but now they had to improvise. They reached ground level just as Burns sprinted around the corner, trying to make a break for it. "Stop!" CIA yelled, brandishing her badge in one hand, drawing her weapon with the other. Burns glanced over his shoulder, panic in his eyes. He clutched the flash drive. For a heartbeat, worried he might toss it or destroy it, but he simply ran. She chased him, boots pounding the cracked pavement. Meanwhile, Santiago pursued the two foreign agents. They vanished behind a row of warehouses, focused on Burns. He was tall and lanky, not a particularly fast runner. She gained on him. Then, abruptly, Burns careened into a chain-link fence. It rattled with the impact. He tried to climb, but was on him in seconds, yanking him down and forcing him to the ground with a swift grappling maneuver. She pinned his arm, pressing her knee into his back to keep him subdued. All right, Burns wheezed, dropping the flash drive. "Don't shoot." CIA repeated, breathless, sliding out her cuffs. "You're under arrest for espionage against the United States. You have the right to remain silent." She read him his Miranda rights with mechanical precision, checking for any concealed weapons. None. She snatched up the flash drive, slipping it into a secure pocket. Sirens in the distance signaled local police en route, summoned by the CIA team's coordination. Exhaled, adrenaline still coursing through her. She pressed down a wave of relief. The operation had ended successfully. A few minutes later, Santiago appeared, panting slightly. "Those foreign contacts got away," he admitted, frustration lining his brow, "but we at least have Burns. The rest can be traced from the flash drive. Good job." Nodded, "We'll get them eventually. Let's get him processed." She rose, hauling Burns upright. Together, she and Santiago escorted him to the black SUV. They had done it. Mission accomplished. Hours later, dawn began to break over D.C., had spent the rest of the night and early morning debriefing at Langley, handing over evidence and completing endless paperwork. When she finally left the building, the sky was painted in soft oranges and purples. Fatigue tugged at her eyelids, but she felt a surge of triumph. Her quick reflexes and meticulous approach had paid off. With Burns in custody and the flash drive recovered, the agency was one step closer to dismantling a major espionage ring. Pulling out her phone, noticed again the multiple missed calls from an unknown number, plus a voicemail notification. Curiosity piqued, she dialed into her voicemail. The line crackled and a hesitant female voice emerged. "Hello, Agent Rhodes, this is Spencer. You might recall we had an incident at the mall. I got your contact from a friend who works in the building. I want to apologize. Please call me back. I need to talk to you. I'm truly sorry," and I ended the message before it finished, her expression unreadable. So had managed to dig up one of his phone numbers. Probably the business card used occasionally for official but less classified interactions. Tapped the phone against her chin, wrestling with annoyance. She could simply ignore it. She owed nothing. But a part of her, the empathetic side that believed in second chances, wondered if this was an attempt at a genuine apology. She sighed. Tucking the phone away, decided she needed sleep before dealing with his call. But fate had other plans. Her phone buzzed again, this time the same unknown number displayed. Paused, mind racing. If she picked up, it could be a can of worms. If she ignored it, might try more desperate methods. against her better judgment, answered, "This is." There was a pause, then the voice crackled with relief. "Agent Rhodes, thank you for picking up. I know this is unusual. I need you to hear me out, please." Said nothing, letting fill the silence. "I was wrong," began, voice trembling. I let my biases and fears turn me into someone I'm not proud of. I've lost my consulting contract at the mall, and honestly, I deserve it. But I can't shake what happened. I keep thinking about the way I treated you, someone who was completely innocent. I humiliated you in front of strangers. It's haunting me." Inhaled, pressing the phone closer. The sincerity in his tone was unexpected. "I see you're sorry, but I'm not sure what you want from me," she replied, her words carefully measured. "I know I can't undo the harm," admitted shakily, "but I want to meet with you. I want to give you a proper apology in person. I want to do more than just say sorry. I want to show you that I'm serious about changing. Please. It would help me find a path to do better. If you refuse, I understand." Leaned against her car, exhaustion tugging at her. "Why me?" she asked softly. "Why do you need my forgiveness specifically?" A pause, because I singled you out for no reason but my own prejudice. Because I saw a young black woman in a store that sells expensive, rare items, and I assumed you were doing something illegal. That's on me. And I realize the harm that people like me with that kind of bias can cause. I'm ashamed, but I also want to fix it. His mind churned. She recalled her conversation with Officer Lewis. She recalled the security footage, the crowd stares, the humiliation that coursed through her veins that day. Yet now she heard genuine remorse in his voice. Despite her frustration, believed in the possibility of personal growth. If was truly willing to learn from this, maybe there was a small chance it could become something positive. "All right," finally said. "I'll meet you but on my terms, somewhere neutral in public, and it'll be brief, understood." Exhaled audibly, relief shimmering in her tone. "Yes, absolutely, anywhere, anytime. I promise I won't waste your time." They arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop near the CIA campus, an area frequented, filled with professionals and government workers. Reasoned that if tried anything bizarre would be in a safe environment. Besides, she doubted was dangerous, just misguided. Ended the call, sliding into the driver's seat. She felt a spike of anxiety, but also a curious sense of resolve. She'd never expected an apology from, let alone an earnest one. Perhaps this meeting could bring closure, a chance for to speak her piece. Tomorrow, she decided, she needed rest first. The next afternoon arrived at the coffee shop, a modern space with sleek wooden tables, plush chairs, and tall windows letting in ample sunlight. Patrons tapped away at laptops or sipped lattes, murmuring quietly in small groups. Wore her casual attire, though she chose a slightly more official look, a blazer over her blouse, to underscore her professionalism. She sat at a small table in the back corner, sipping green tea, posture poised. Arrived a few minutes later, looking markedly different from the haughty figure at the mall. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled into a low ponytail, no trace of heavy makeup. Her expression was guarded, almost nervous, as though expecting to be turned away. When she spotted, she approached tentatively. "Thank you for meeting me," said, voice low, motioned for her to sit. For a moment they regarded each other in silence. Observed the tension in his features, the slight tremble of her hands. A pang of sympathy flickered within despite everything. "So," said, taking a sip of tea, "you wanted to talk." Nodded, swallowing. She reached into her purse, pulled out a small white envelope, and set it on the table. "This is a written statement," she explained. "A formal admission of what I did that day, harassment, racial profiling, along with an apology. I'd like you to have it, in case you ever need a record of my wrongdoing." Blinked, a bit taken aback by the gesture. She tentatively placed her hand on the envelope but didn't open it yet. Continued, words tumbling out in a rush. "I know it seems dramatic, but I realize that people can do harm, and if they're not held accountable, nothing changes. This is me taking accountability. I was ignorant, I was hateful, and I was wrong. Because of me, you were forced to reveal your identity in public, to endure that humiliation. I'm deeply sorry." For the first time, sensed real contrition behind his eyes, a vulnerability that replaced the arrogant posture remembered. She set her tea down, crossing her arms lightly. "I appreciate the apology, and I can see you're trying to atone. But do you realize how damaging your actions could have been if I hadn't been a CIA agent? What if I was just another black woman with no official badge, no one to back me up?" His gaze dropped to the table. "I know, believe me, that's what haunts me. I keep replaying it, imagining if it had been someone else, someone who didn't have the means to defend themselves. It's horrifying. And that's why I'm seeking help, counseling, anti-bias training, anything to ensure I don't repeat this. I can't change the past, but I can do better going forward. Studied's face weighing the authenticity. She believed in second chances, but she wasn't naive. I hope you're sincere, said finally, because these issues run deeper than just one confrontation. It's about acknowledging a system that allows people to profile others based on skin color. Nodded solemnly, I'm learning that now. It's overwhelming, but I want to face it. I lost my job at the mall, and while I was angry at first, I've come to see it as a consequence of my own choices. Silence hung between them for a few beats. Its mind flickered back to her own experiences, childhood moments of casual racism, college run-ins with prejudice. She asked softly, have you apologized to anyone else you might have harassed over the years? His eyes glistened with tears. I'm trying to find them. Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? I'm actually going back through my history, seeing if there were other people I lashed out at. It's painful but necessary. Most of them I can't track. But I knew how to contact you. She attempted a shaky smile. Lucky you, right? Almost smiled back, a small quirk of her lips. Lucky me, she echoed, her tone wry. She reached for the envelope, tucking it into her bag. I accept your apology, but forgiveness is complicated. Don't expect me to wave a wand and pretend it didn't happen. You need to continue doing the work. Nodded resolutely, I understand. They spoke for another 10 minutes, discussing practical steps was taking, reading recommended books, joining a local diversity and inclusion group. Initially skeptical, found herself cautiously optimistic that transformation might be genuine. When asked if there was anything wanted from her, simply responded, use whatever influence you have to educate others who might think the way you once did. Help them see how damaging it is. Promised she would. Then with a quiet thanks, she rose to leave. At the last second, she hesitated. I know I lost my job at the mall, but if there's ever a time you're there again and feel comfortable enough, I'd like to buy you a coffee or lunch. Maybe continue this conversation, but only if you want. Offered a polite nod, though she wasn't sure if she would ever take up on that. We'll see. Take care of yourself. With that, left, weaving through the crowd of professionals at the coffee shop's entrance. Exhaled, resting her elbows on the table, mind swirling with conflicting emotions. She felt the weight of the envelope in her bag, a tangible sign that intended to stand by her apology. For the meeting was a step toward closure, a reminder that even among everyday cruelty, some individuals could choose to confront their own prejudice and strive to change. Over the next few weeks, remained immersed in CIA work. The agency made significant progress dismantling Burns's network, thanks to the data recovered during the warehouse operation. Found herself in strategic meetings, briefing high-level officials. One crisp morning, as she walked a hushed corridor in Langley, she paused by a window overlooking the facility's manicured grounds. The reflection of her own face caught her attention. Steadfast eyes, shoulders upright. A woman who had navigated both national security threats and the sting of everyday discrimination. She remembered the day had called security on her, the rush of anger and the sting of humiliation. Yet she also recalled how she'd stood her ground, eventually revealing that CIA badge. The swirl of events led to ban from the mall, the soul-searching that followed, and an unexpected, heartfelt apology. Inhaled deeply, letting a sense of resilience fill her chest. Sometimes bigotry was like a labyrinth. It could ensnare not just the victim, but also the perpetrator in a cycle of fear and ignorance. Breaking that cycle demanded courage, accountability, and empathy. In her career, had faced lethal dangers, terror plots, espionage, high-stakes chases. But this personal confrontation with prejudice felt equally significant in its own way. It reminded her that battles for justice happened on many fronts, not all of them recognized with medals or headlines. As she resumed her walk, received a text message from Officer Lewis. Mall did a formal dedication to inclusive practices. They posted your story anonymously as an example. People are talking about it, thought you'd like to know. A small smile touched lips, progress, one step at a time. Her phone vibrated again with another message, this one from simply stating, I'm volunteering at a local community center teaching job skills, thanks for the push. M. Didn't reply, but she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. Some regrets lead people to do better. That was all she needed to know. She tucked her phone away and continued down the corridor to her next briefing. It was time to focus on the mission at hand. She'd found her own closure. The sense of justice she carried came not only from exposing espionage, but also from standing up for herself against the more insidious forms of injustice. She walked on, heart resolute, leaving behind the memory of that humiliating day at the mall, transformed now into a testament of strength, personal dignity, and the power of choosing to change. And in that quiet moment, she realized something profound. Sometimes the most unexpected twists of fate, the day a white woman calls security on a black girl without cause, can catalyze both confrontation and growth. Learned the hard way that prejudice has consequences, while stood taller knowing she never again had to hide her worth. In the grand tapestry of life, that single confrontation would echo as a lesson in humility, accountability, and the unstoppable resolve of someone who refused to be diminished. Badge or no badge, agent or civilian, black woman in America, forging her own path.